Hello and welcome to the Intentional Clinician podcast. I'm your host, Paul Krauss, licensed professional counselor. In today's episode, I'm going to be speaking with Barbara Lane as she tells a very personal story about her life and the life of her sisters. More on that in a moment. Barbara Lane has been a foster child, sister, wife, mother, grandmother, entrepreneur, speaker, child advocate, educator, ministerial counselor, and author, in addition to her writing. She has spent 25 years in private practice as a ministerial counselor, and she has an educational background in human development, social sciences, and family psychology with a focus on child abuse. You are in for a real treat today as she shares her personal story of being in the foster care system and touches on many issues including family separation, bonding, attachment, child maltreatment, relationship formation, the resilience of the human spirit, healing from trauma, and the power in having faith in something greater than yourself. Her personal journey is in the book Broken Water. I believe you're really going to enjoy this interview, and I believe it's going to inspire many of you. Just a trigger warning, as it does openly discuss the themes of child abuse and maltreatment. All right, let's get to the interview. Welcome to the podcast, Barbara Lane. I'm so glad to have you today.
Oh, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here. Just thrilled. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, absolutely. And we are going to be talking all about your book, Broken Water, which is a true story of your life and the life of your sisters, and how this is what it says right in the title of the book. 11 sisters abandoned and abused reunite after 43 years and share their stories. And I have to say, it's a page turner. I read the first half or so within a few days, and it is really moving. And I think what the new term everyone's using is authentic. You're not sort of posturing in any way that I could make out. It's this very true story. So it makes it a little bit raw for some readers, but I think people are really going to get a lot out of it because they say the truth sets you free. And I can see you're a truth teller. And even so, the sisters sort of knighted you or whatever, designated you as the truth teller to write the book. So there you go. You have a gift for that.
I'll get back at them someday.
Yeah. So to talk about it, I've read your bio and everything. So you've been doing a lot of work in the healing professions with your master's in family psychology and your ministerial counseling ordination. But could you tell us just a little bit about your story, kind of some of the backstory, so the listeners can kind of understand who haven't read the book yet?
Sure. I like to start when I was 3 because I don't know a whole heck of a lot before then, except for the little things that then eventually the sisters told me. But when I was 3, I was the 9th of 10 girls to be born in the Lane family. We were very poor. We lived in the projects in the city of St. Louis. For some reasons, my mother kicked our father out. They weren't getting along. There was infidelity, things like that. And probably about 6 to 8 months into that, she decided in the December month in, 1954, going back a ways, that she was going to turn off the heat, turn off the water, and take the youngest baby, who was 7 months old at the time, my little sister Pam, with her and abandon the rest of us that still lived in the apartment and just take off with a new boyfriend. So that's what she did. And even though that was many years ago, I just think it's important for readers to know it happens regularly today. So once she left, we had one older sister that was left there too. She sold a skate to buy bologna so that we could have something to eat. 3 days into that, our neighbor kind of figured out something was wrong in there and called my eldest sister, Ruth, who was already married and out of the home. Now, back then, women didn't drive. There was no texting during the day.
Hmm.
You'd have maybe a scheduled phone call every so often. So she had no idea what was going on. When the neighbor called, she just fell apart. She just couldn't believe our mother would do that. She called the neighborhood priest, who called Catholic Charities, who came and swept us up. We ended up in an Italian orphanage, St. Dominic's in University City in St. Louis. And I will tell you, Paul, my older sisters were terribly traumatized. You can imagine how they felt. They loved our mother. They'd already lost our father. And then, for a mother to just leave us like that. But I wasn't traumatized. And this is the important point of this book, Broken Water. My older sisters were with me, so I could care where we were as long as I was with them. They took care of me, they pampered me, they protected me in the orphanage because several of them had traumatic experiences, sexual abuse with the priest that was visiting, things like that. I had none of that. I didn't even know we were in any kind of danger or had experienced any kind of sadness because my sisters had always babied me, loved me, and cared for me. My trauma, Paul, was when I watched them leave the orphanage.
Mm.
One by one, they carried little suitcases, they got in cars, and I wasn't with them. I wasn't going with them. I didn't understand foster care. I didn't understand they might be back, they might not be back. And eventually, myself and a sister 18 months older than I were placed in foster care in the same way. Now, my sister Kay, who I grew up with, and I were placed in the home of a mafia grunt. So he did everything in his power to isolate us so that he could abuse us in numerous ways. Isolation is one of the most powerful things abusers use to continue abusing their victims. So anyway, he cut us off from our sisters, et cetera, et cetera. And we grew up in that home. But I have to tell you, at the age of 3.5, when we were placed in that home, I never forgot my sisters. I never forgot that love they gave me and that caring they gave me. And I kept that with me my entire life. At 3.5, I knew their names in birth order. I remembered them. So Broken Water goes on to explain my life and my sister Kay's growing up in foster care and my search, my journey to solve the mystery of my past and to relocate my other sisters. And it took 43 years. So that's the summary of the book in a nutshell.
Yes, absolutely. And I appreciate your openness and all of your,
Mhm.
talking about this because I do think there's quite a few people out there that either have family members or themselves that have been in foster care or have had an experience where
Mhm.
a parent or both parents were not able to care for them. And in your case, it was, like I'm glad that you are pointing this out, but you're right. I was reading and you just felt this love from your sisters, and they were obviously older and could kind of tell what was going on, and they really shielded you and your little sister to try to protect you.
Yes.
And I think that's really important for childhood development. But you're right, when they left, I mean, that's like the worst thing. And then reading the book and seeing how some of them would call the house and they wouldn't tell the truth about you being
Right.
there, or maybe you were too busy or something like that. I don't remember exactly if they lied completely or if they just kind of put them off the trail. But I think that's horrible. And then, of course, obviously the abuse of that foster man or whatever you want to call him.
Whatever. I've got some choice words, but I don't think
Right.
I'll use them.
Yeah. And then, of course, his wife trying to sort of be a mother, but in like a very um, authoritarian kind of manner. Was that the
She
right
was
word?
what I would call parasitic.
Okay.
She we were like tokens to
Mm,
her. for, always being the cleanest, always being the well-dressed. Although we were never allowed to go anywhere except with her, we were
Mm.
pretty confined to the home. Again, isolation being one of the tools that abusers use quite often.
Right, and using that image to kind of show that the family. I think you had like there
Yeah,
was a photographer that came over and
right.
tried to show off this family is such an ideal family in the neighborhood or something like that as
We
well.
were we were featured in this what was the St. Louis Post-Dispatch back then as the ideal foster family, so that they could promote, foster care.
Oh my
And of
goodness.
course, by that point in time, we were so fearful of anything. We never said a word. If they said smile, we smiled or
Mm,
whatever.
yeah,
So there was unbelievable, but that's the truth.
yeah, that is, and I appreciate you speaking openly in the book. You detail, a lot of that and how it was
Mhm.
occurring and the cycle that was going on in the house and how you were trying to shield your sister from it and all of these other
Right.
things. And uh, I think it's important for people out there who have experienced abuse and sexual abuse and physical abuse to speak up about it, if possible, if they can get away from the situation to a safe place, because um, not only is that going to be better for you to be able to get help for the abuse psychologically or physically, uh, my hope is that it brings awareness that people are on the lookout for people that are abusing and that they eventually have consequences for their actions, but they don't always, unfortunately, because they usually choose children or often use children as the victims, which are harder
Correct.
to hold accountable.
And it holds children captive, so to speak. For example, in our foster home, our foster father had a gun that he threatened us with all the time.
Mm,
If you tell, I'll kill your sister, kind of fear. From the time you're 3 on up, you don't know how to process that kind of fear, and you do whatever they say in a way. And I did this till I was 14. And then at the age of 14, I guess I was so depressed and so distraught that I really didn't want to be in that foster home anymore. I didn't want to be, period. So, unbeknownst to me, I stood up to a bully, I guess, and I said to him, just get your gun and shoot me because I don't want to be here anymore. Just please just shoot me. Ironically, he kind of looked at me, lifted his hand like he was going to hit me, and then he put his hand down, walked out of the room, and never bothered me again. So there, little did I know that at 14, in his eyes, I was standing up to his bullying. In mine, I just wanted some kind of out. Just let me
mm,
out of this. But it gave me a beautiful out because somehow, and I think I will credit the love I felt from my sisters, I knew what love felt like.
mm,
I knew what caring felt like. And the minute I walked in that foster home, I knew something wasn't right. But at 14, when he just finally left me alone, I just embraced being a 14-year-old. I rode my bike because they started letting me leave the house. I got into the glee club, I played sports. I did things that I don't know if I would have even reached out for if I hadn't had that core love, bonding, and attachment with my sisters. So, but you spoke of encouraging people to speak their truth. It's very, very difficult. And one thing I'd like to share, and I think it's important so that individuals who've experienced this don't feel further guilt that they can't
oh,
speak their
good
truth,
point. Yes, very good point.
um, is that we have 6 sisters remaining, and none of them knew the other sisters' stories until I published Broken Water.
Mm,
Now, this is a close, bonded group of sisters. The pain was so hard, so tough, so shaming, and the need to protect each other so strong that they didn't tell each other their stories. Once Broken Water was published, they all got the book before I could even send them a copy, and the healing that took place amongst them, because they didn't know. They knew, but they didn't know. Now they
Right.
had the whole stories, and it brought them closer. They were able to grieve things that they had no control over. It was a very healing experience for all of us. And of course, I bawled like a baby each time one of them was bawling. So, but that's just a testament to how hard it is to talk about your past. So hard. And I just believe I was incredibly fortunate to have two amazing healers enter my life, my therapist and my mentor, that I was able to, I call it loving through faith, not in the traditional sense of faith, but in a faith that the individual you're working with has everything inside them to heal.
Mm.
And if you hang on to that faith and you reflect it back to them, that kind of can get a sense of comfort in their own ability to stand up and speak their truth. It's complicated, and yet it's simple. And they did that for me.
That's amazing. Yeah, it does take. Like I remember your first counselor that you walked out of their office
Mm-hmm.
had told you that you had to go stand up to your abuser and yell at them or something like that,
Yeah,
or tell them
yeah.
you never want to see them again or something.
Mm-hmm.
And he broke the rules of you don't tell clients what to do, first of all.
Right, right.
And he just met you. So there's
Yes.
no like rapport established or anything like
No,
that.
no.
Um,
And
and
I
so
was no way ready to stand up to that kind of evil. He was talking to the little girl in me that was just still fearful. I needed to work through all that.
absolutely. And I think with that, it unfortunately took you out of therapy for a little while and
Yes, it
and
did.
not getting some help. And that's a
Right,
message to therapists. We have
right.
to be patient with our clients. And I my sense is, and I could be, I don't know what his deal was, but part of me thinks he was so angry at this person that his personal feelings got projected onto you, called countertransference, and he wanted you to
Possible.
go tell
Yeah,
them and cut them out, and
yeah,
you weren't
right.
ready for that. You were just trying to
No,
heal, not you weren't trying to
right.
go, that
It
was the
was
way
the
he would handle it, maybe not the way
it
you
was
would handle it.
right. It was the very first time I ever had those words, allowed them to come out of my throat and voice. That was the
Mm.
very first time I ever put words on what happened. And he just said, what, you just need to go tell him, get out of your life and you'll be fine, or something along those.
Oh my
There
goodness.
was just no way.
Hmm. And that is possibly also, there's also another cultural factor, is that a lot of therapists back, I think at that time, I'm not
Yeah,
sure what year that was, but the trauma informed care was not
no,
a paradigm that people understood. And so some therapists were amazing at working with trauma, but I don't know if they knew what they were doing other than their intuition and their kind of maybe client-centered techniques, and their, helping you just own your identity, and the classic things therapists been doing for since the 50s or whenever it was started. But healers have been
hmm,
doing it for so much longer. Indigenous healers and faith,
correct.
people in the and different systems, obviously before there was officially a therapist, but but then there was other therapists in the time that if it didn't work with their technique, they just kind of didn't know what to do. And
Right.
that is another message to therapists, because we have a lot of therapists listen to this podcast. If you don't know what to do, either get consultation or transfer the person to somebody that can help them, because that's
That's right.
important. Because if this therapist had been patient, even going, shoot, I don't know what to do, I'm really mad at this abuser and I really want to help her, you might have progressed earlier. But that's okay. It's not what happened, but I'm just pointing it out for the
That's
therapy
okay.
crowd out there.
And it was all in correct timing. If I look back on it, it was all perfect. I wouldn't have found the people in my life that I found that
It's true.
became more than just my therapist or just my counselor. They became more to me than that. Almost, we became cohorts, and eventually, after years of therapy, where we worked together and traveled together and did some amazing things cross country. So that probably would have never happened. So I
That's
don't know
very
if I'd have pursued the education I did or the career I did. So my primary therapist, Donna Kitchen, was raised Hindu. Now I was
mm.
raised Catholic.
Oh,
So this was a very foreign kind of thought to me that she gently tried to help me see that not that there's anything wrong with Catholicism, she never said that, but that, it was okay for me to explore my own spirituality, my own soul, what calls me to the divine, which may have never happened. So it was all in perfect timing.
I'm glad. I love that perspective. Obviously, you've lived a lot of life and have a wise way of
Mm.
looking at things. I Well, little segue before I kind of ask you some more questions about your
Mm-hmm.
life story is that your career for many
Mm-hmm.
years was being a professional helper and a ministerial counselor, which is also professional but also connected to spirituality. Can you explain a little bit about what you did once you
Sure.
learned to help people?
Sure. Having had years of therapy with Donna, she introduced me to my next mentor, a fellow by the name of David Grove, who was a Maori chief, actually. And he um, invented this incredible therapeutic technique using metaphor, not in the traditional sense that you would find metaphor, but in helping a client develop a sense of metaphor inside them
Mm,
that fit the experience that they had. And he did this with a technology called clean language, asking very clean questions that do not lead the client, but
mm,
offers a window of opportunity for the client to kind of like go into their own story or it's not hypnosis, but into their own kind of realm of understanding as a child would understand that trauma and then draw it out with little if any influence from you, just very basic, like 6 clean questions you would ask. And I ended up under his mentorship. So I it transformed some of the traumas in my life that people might think could never be transformed. They were transformed. They created an opportunity for me to reevaluate and almost kind of change the memory that you had. You know what happened, but your experience of it can change through metaphor, which frees you. So that is kind of soul work in my mind's eye. That is working with the spirit and the essence and the soul, because you can never direct the soul. You let
mm.
the soul direct, right? So I knew I wanted to do that. I knew what it did for me, what my therapist Donna's um, faith in me did, and encouragement to get an education, because before that, I couldn't read. I could not read. I'd look at the words on a page and they just bounce all over. I struggled through school. I had teachers would refer to me with the R word, which I won't even
Oh goodness, I
say.
did not realize that.
Yeah, so, but through therapy with her, all of a sudden one day, the words on the page settled down. No
Mm.
medicine now. This was therapy. And I could read. Well, I was like a kid in a candy store. I couldn't get out of the bookstore. I couldn't get out of the library. I couldn't read enough. What is the world I was learning? And that kind of transformation and my thirst for knowledge after that led me to go to school, led me to get my graduate degree, and then led me to do my ordination. And I am still a student,
Mm.
constantly and forever. Um, so, all of that, when I look back, Paul, I just got to say, in a strange way, it's all been a gift. I don't think I'd be where I was, where I am. So
Yeah.
it's, it's never, I'm not saying trauma's okay. I'm not saying
Right.
there's not evil. I'm not saying that I need to forgive that, we could get into what forgiveness means and doesn't mean, but I can say that I probably wouldn't be who I am if I hadn't had all of that experience.
Yes, and yeah, and the way you went through that and you
Hmm.
learned, and
Hmm.
that shows. I think I think this is a lesson for people, but also for therapists, but I'll just say with people,
Mm-hmm.
having patience with people that have troubles. I
Yes.
think in the world of education, that's an easy example.
Mm-hmm.
I think schools have gotten better at, making individualized education plans and getting extra help and that sort of thing, especially in the last 15 years. But
Yes.
um, everyone has potential to learn. It's just that
That's
we
right.
have to find out how they learn. And there's not a one size fits all for learning, as we know. I mean, they keep adding new ones, but there's like 15 different types of intelligence that people can
Yes.
have, right? And
Yes.
and what that means is not that that intelligence doesn't necessarily equal like smart or whatever we want to. The language is lacking. What it means is that, they have an ability, an inborn ability that, if drawn out, can really be something, right? It's
Exactly.
music, tactile, spatial,
Yeah.
language, writing, math,
Yes.
physics. I mean, we could just keep going. People have talents in some directions, and in other places, maybe they struggle. It's a little bit more difficult. It doesn't come as naturally, right? And so I think it's a tough place to be in, but it's important to find out where people's strengths are. But secondly, having faith in your clients that they can find
Mm.
what they need, and obviously providing them with adequate coping skills and resources and books and opportunities and whatever you have to. We don't want to be naive and think, level of care, right? If somebody's really in a bad place, we don't just have faith. We put them in the hospital, right? We make sure
Right.
they're safe.
Absolutely.
But what you're talking about is an outpatient counseling place where you were really struggling, and she believed you could get better. She also believed you could achieve in ways that you hadn't been able to in the past. And then it happened
That's right.
because I'm assuming you had your own resilience, but she also was kind of feeding you
Yes.
this hope, right? And
Yes.
that has to do with rapport, but it also has to do with the therapist. I think I've said this before in different ways with the people I supervise, and is that you can know all the techniques in the world and even have a good conversation with a client. But if you don't innately believe somewhere in your body and your mind that they can overcome something in their life or achieve one of their goals or all of their goals, to an extent,
Mm-hmm.
um, I think eventually they're going to feel that.
Yeah.
And they may not be able to name it, but they can feel that, and it'll affect your work, and then it'll affect the patient. So I think we have to believe in it and trust that sometimes, most of the times, therapists don't have the answers. We're a guide to help that person find out what the answer is for them.
That's right. That's right. And that can happen in therapy, and that can not happen in therapy.
True. It can happen elsewhere. Yeah.
It can happen elsewhere, and I also think that developmentally, you're hindered in some cases. Fear is a tremendous hindrance to learning. And even though I was in my 30s, my therapist, Donna, I wasn't afraid of her. Over time, I began to trust her. Over time, I felt she listened to my soul. That's the only
Mm,
way I know how to explain it. My soul is very wise, but I couldn't hear my soul, but she did. She heard it, and she would reflect it back to me. And I mean, I just started reading, and I wrote a book. So,
it's true.
something has worked.
Something has worked, and it's a
Hmm.
real, very well written book. I mean, it just flows. It just flows
Thank
like
you.
a conversation. That's what it felt like to me. It's like you're just telling the story, and it's visually. I'm a visual person,
Mm-hmm.
and some books I read, I can't picture it, right? And I just don't really finish them usually. But
Yeah.
in your book, I could immediately picture the scenes in my mind. And of
Good.
course, you had a few pictures in there, but that wasn't how I was picturing it. My brain just
Hmm.
picked. That means the writing to me is very evocative, in a good
Good.
way.
Thank
So
you. I hope so.
yeah, I think so. I think people are going to enjoy it. I was going to ask you,
Mhm.
about, because you eventually got reunited with all your sisters. That's the
Yes.
positive part.
Yeah.
That happened, and there's been a lot, and that was years ago, but there's been a lot of conversations and meetings and relationship building to make up, I guess not make up for lost time, I hate to say that, but like you really intentionally have relationships with all the sisters that are around and were around,
Hmm.
because I don't know, because you love each other and you want to be there. I don't know, tell me more about that.
So when we were first reunited, it was like we'd never been apart.
Hmm.
It was when we were first reunited, I literally threw myself into my sister's arms. There were two waiting in the driveway of the house of a niece I didn't know I had. And I recognized them, believe it or not, who they must have been. And I jumped out of the car before it stopped. I literally threw myself in their arms. I recognized their smell. I recognized their voice, their touch, the felt, emotions of
Hmm.
that. And we all experienced that. We all were like we'd never been apart. And it was, we would regress to a very much younger age when we get together. We still do. We're silly. We laugh. We play games. We just have recaptured is the word I'd like to use. We recaptured our youth and have uh, re-experienced the years that we missed. We've filled them. We just keep filling them, So it's been just a beautiful thing.
That is wonderful. That it has this story arc where you actually, after so many years, because you were how
Hmm.
old when you finally met them again?
I was, let's see, 46.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Oh my goodness. And it was, I was reading that chapter. It was just like beautiful just to see, just to read that. And I
Mm.
saw some of the photos. Incredibly healing. And they had been looking for you the whole time also, from what I could
Several of them
understand.
have. Yes, they were. Again, no, my foster father, when the older sisters would call to check on us, he would say, they aren't here anymore. I don't know where they were placed, so quit calling, quit bothering me, kind of thing. But we were there the whole time. And the two eldest sisters would rely on getting feedback from the social worker at the time, who, like today, was incredibly overwhelmed with
Mm,
cases. And
mhm.
if she didn't hear much, she would, you just kind of got lost in the system, which still happens today, sadly.
Oh, it's definitely unfortunately happening. Worked as a therapist with
Hmm.
children in the foster care system for years
Mm,
in Phoenix, and
mm,
they would have almost a new caseworker every 4 months,
right.
because the caseworkers really, most of them that I met were just really wanting to help, but they had such a high caseload.
Yeah.
And in some ways, the work could be dangerous because you're dealing with folks that are angry that their children may be in foster care, or other situations where maybe the foster, some, unfortunately there are situations like yours where the foster parents are exactly not on the level, right?
Right.
And then there's some dangerous things there, and just that you have to, you can't just I feel like you can't just put children's lives on an Excel calendar. I feel like you have to
I
spend the
know.
time. And so so the CPS workers, sorry, whatever they're called, foster care system workers that I worked with, the good ones, looked like they had aged about 10 years. They were
Of course.
so, working 60 hours a week or more just to do the basics. And then the other ones felt, like that I met some that were trying to keep to their hours to have boundaries for their family, and then they felt guilty. So
Right.
it's like, obviously the system is overrun and still overrun to the point where we could use probably a double the staff that are in any given state, my estimate. And I'm just kind of speaking in hyperbole because I don't really have the statistics on that, but that was my anecdotal experience
Yes.
of working on that.
Yes. It still is. I spent years working as a child advocate.
Hmm.
I would say that's probably one of the most successful interventions a child can have is to have a child advocate. Um, watching over their case, because as an appointed arm of the court, you're the right arm of the judge, and you're not restricted as social workers are. You don't have to make an appointment to just run in and stop in at any time, day or night, to see what's going on with that family. The first case I got, let me preface this with, my mother ended up having a total of 13 children, two
Mm.
of which we don't know what
Oh, yeah.
happened or where they are. But the first case I got, the mother had 13 children. So this can't be coincidental. I mean, I'm working with a mother who had 13 kids, was abandoning them all, getting them taken away, the whole story all over again. So I had to be very careful about my own transferences in this case, and try to help the mother and follow her, and find the best placements for the kids. But as a child advocate, you go to court for that child. You are that child's voice, and it's powerful. So it's something, if individuals want to really help, it's something to consider volunteering for. It's powerful.
Yeah, it's amazing. I actually worked with a few. We in Arizona they call them court-appointed special advocates, or CASAs.
Right.
And I don't know what
CASA. Yeah,
I don't know if
that's what I was.
is that universal? Okay, so they were phenomenal people. I worked
Hmm.
with, and they would show up at every meeting, every treatment planning meeting with the
Hmm.
child, court. They'd have extensive notes. They would visit the homes, and they really did a great job with some of
Good.
these kids. So I was very impressed by them, and I would call them all the time, actually,
Yeah,
to get,
because
because
they
I had a
know.
release of information, and I would
Yeah,
call them all the time to find out
yeah,
details, and they actually helped
right.
coordinate some of the therapy appointments.
Correct.
So I would say, and it was volunteer. It was mostly older
Right,
folks or professionals who had money and means to be able to take time out of their lives to help these kids. But
right.
I, I, I almost wish they were paying people for this. You know what I mean?
Mm,
Like
mm,
people that are maybe retired that need some meaning in your life, and just
yeah.
showing up
It's
in a kid's
it's
life is amazing.
It's very powerful, and the one thing I made sure occurred with all these kids was sibling visits, which
Mm.
I myself know how important that is in the foster care system. You're separated, you don't see your siblings. Um, I made sure that those things occurred, supervised visits with parents, because good or bad, it's really helpful to know your history. It's really helpful.
It really is, because without a sense of meaning, we get that from connections with
Right.
family history. Without a sense of meaning, every sort of mental health problem emerges that you can name. It just depends on the person's
Mm,
biology and their kind of background, their genetic expression. But we have not only loss of meaning, but almost every foster kid you've ever met is extremely stressed out. And if you, of course, I will not go into the whole spiel, but people can just look at the Adverse Child Experiences study. That was done
okay.
on people mostly not in the foster care system. They were upper middle class people in San
Uh-huh.
Diego, and just
Mhm.
seeing the effects of any sort of neglect or abuse on people who actually had familial supports that were consistent or semi-consistent
Mhm.
will just give you an idea, if you read that report, read some of those studies, of what it could do to somebody who does not have consistent
Right,
familial supports
right.
in their life. The amount of stress and things that can go wrong, both not only mental health wise, but in the physical health of the people in the long term studies the percentage chance of catching of getting diseases or having
Mhm.
comorbidities with different conditions like cardiovascular diabetes is incredibly high.
That's
So the
right.
fact that you seem to be quite healthy and had a career
Yeah,
is amazing and kind of a miracle in my sort of armchair opinion. But you detail it in the book.
mm,
But we've been talking about the foster system, and I think there's a lot of things to be done there. And I think an action step for people that they don't know what to do. There's so many bad things in the world going on.
mm.
That's a place to investigate.
That's right. There's so much you can do to help kids in foster care. up something as simple as maybe your listeners have heard of this, is donate suitcases, because I've worked with a lot of adults who have suffered trauma in foster care, and one of the things that they have a difficulty seeing is the black trash bag. It'll
Mm.
set them off, because what did they carry their things around in from home to home? Is a black trash bag. So, you buy them a nice suitcase. How hard could that be? Call your Child Protective Services. Ask them what you can do. If you're a hairdresser, call and say, can I give free haircuts? Or donate clothes. Just, how difficult it is for a child to go to their first day of school. They want to look their best, they want their hair to look nice, or whatever they want that to be. And, they kids in foster care have first day of school over and over and over. So, there's just so many things. And if this is of interest, and I hope it is to a lot of people, because we sure need to do something about it. There's just so many simple things that could change these children's lives.
Absolutely. And that has a large effect on society, because all of
Yeah.
these kids are in the systems in all the states,
Mm-hmm.
and not many get adopted, and then they age out.
No.
And then that
Right.
is very difficult as a young adult in today's economy and just the way things are. There are some decent programs in certain big, larger cities.
Yes, right.
Where they're helping the young adults from 18 to 24 with some extra things like housing and stability and job training. But again, not everybody gets into those programs, and
That's right.
there's a lot of people that fall through the cracks. And this is all preventable. Unfortunately, the resources aren't really devoted to it.
No, there aren't. And, I've been faced with the question with individuals, well, why should I care? Those aren't my kids, and there's nothing you can do to change this cycle. And I would say, just look at the cost to society. If you only want to look at it as a financial burden, you're paying for this particular circumstance that you don't think you should care about. So sometimes that's the way people hear it. Sad, but true.
Yeah, and that's actually was one of my questions. I was going to ask you a little bit about just, we don't have to go on about this, but just a little bit about what people can understand about generational abuse and the cycle of trauma. What are some things you could say about that?
I think that we tend to drag our kids into therapy pretty quick. And I would recommend to adults, parents who have experienced trauma in their childhood, who may not think they need intervention, to get it anyway, to enter therapy, because it has a way of seeping out in unrecognizable form by you, and it will be absorbed by the child in unrecognizable form as well, and it will wind up carrying that generationally, cross generationally. I think that you're the best gift you can give your children is your own mental health, taking care of that first, because you won't have that anger, the triggers of anger, you won't have the triggers of anxiety, and you'll recognize when you make a mistake and have the egoless, I'll just call it that, bravery to say, boy, did I mess that up. Can we try that again? Whereas if you're carrying all of that trauma in you, it's really hard to admit you've made a mistake, because that opens up a bag of worms. And, so we're, defensive and pretentious. Whereas you work on yourself, find your own, open up to your own soul. You're going to give your kids a great gift.
I love the way you put that. Very wise words. One of the things I've always done and I learned this when I was working in social services, and now I'm in a group practice that we do take Medicaid and private insurance. So we actually get quite a variety of folks coming in, which is kind of rare for a group practice. But when I was in full social services, which is basically all Medicaid and grant-based services, we started learning about, well, this is something we should have learned in grad school, but we basically started almost mandating if we're going to work with your kid, we need you
Right.
from appointment one, parent, to come in for parent meetings alone
Right.
and family meetings, because we can't treat a kid in isolation of the environment.
No.
And now I'll tell you what, I got a lot of resistance from a lot of parents.
Of course you did.
Because they said, well, he's the one who's throwing his cell phone and yelling in McDonald's and won't listen to me. And I said, I understand that. And they have anger troubles, but I also need you. And I can say this as a fact, I believe. I can say this as a fact. I don't have the study in front of me. This is all stuff people can find that go to grad schools. But you get the parents to change just a little bit and get on board with the plan.
Yeah.
That kid will change so much faster than just me, the
Overnight,
therapist. Overnight, right?
That's right.
Because children are dependent on you with their nervous systems, and they're dependent on you, and that's from brain science, and they're dependent on you for their emotional health up until a certain age. And then they start to be dependent on friends and mentors and different things, and coaches and things like that. But when they're young, they're completely dependent on you, and they're looking to you for how to act at every moment. I not to scare parents, but you're programming in their brain at every moment how you keep the house, what food you give them, what you listen to, what spirituality, political opinions, all of this stuff. They are absorbing it, and it's this is not funny, but I find it ironic sometimes, because there'll be a parent who's got a very strong opinion about something or other in the world, right? And they'll keep telling their kid every day, hey, you got to listen about this opinion I have, right?
That's right.
But the kid is watching your behavior.
That finger going right at their face, that scowl.
Yeah.
They just take all that in. They're sponges.
They are learning your behavior. They're not. And in fact, it depends on the kid. Some kids, of course, take on their parents' opinions completely. And some kids rebel. It's like kind of a 50-50, because, and some kids, of course, ignore their parents' opinions. But they actually are learning that you are incongruent, is what they're learning. They're learning that you can have an opinion and be loud about it, but it doesn't matter how you apply it, right? And so I tell parents, I even say today, I said, you work on your trigger, like you said, triggers. Actually, I'm quoting you now, but you work on your triggers and the things that make you upset, and you learn how to be with your kid, and that is going to change them. Now, obviously, with younger kids, you've got to learn structure and incentives and behavioral plans and these sort of things, right? That are important for them to learn those boundaries, but you have to still do it in a fashion that is palatable for the child, where they don't just automatically rebel against you. And then with the older children, teens and young adults, really understanding your power is limited, right? And so not to go off on this completely, but it's so important, because that's what stops, I think, the generational horrific, whatever the parents went through. Maybe, honestly, a lot of parents went through horrible things, right? And they're trying to sometimes they overcompensate. They shield their kids from any, difficulties. So doing your own work will help you see what you're doing behaviorally and cognitively and emotionally. And that, the kids...
That's the core.
Oh my God. I had a kid one time, and I won't name any names or how old he was, but it was a male child, obviously. And I got through to his mother somehow. She came in, and this woman, she was a toughest woman you would meet, and she could probably take down a football player. Like, she was beefy and tough and aggressive. And I talked to her, and I don't remember what I said, but I was just like, I'm kind of concerned about your son, and his, he's kind of hanging out with these kind of kids that are in gangs and all of this, and he's only 14 or something like that. And I asked her, how are you talking to him about his this and that? And she kind of started crying, and she said, well, I'm doing what my dad did. And I said, what's that? She said, well, I'm yelling at him and telling him he's going to turn into a no good criminal. And I said, oh no. So
here we go.
So then I simply worked with her on changing her language, which was telling him, I know you're better than that. And you are a gifted, smart boy, and you've got a lot of skills. And she started saying this, and I remember them coming in for another session, and then I had them do some activity where they had to look at each other, because they're always bickering. And they cried, and hugged in my
Oh,
office so
oh,
much that I
oh.
felt almost uncomfortable.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
had to sit back
I'd have
because
cried too.
I was trying not to cry because,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know. It's just, that's
See, as a
my
minister, I could cry.
childhood. Right. Yeah. Well, as a therapist, I was trying to stay a little bit more
Right.
neutral, but
Of course, of
they
course.
cried. And I remember the end of the situation is that he actually got off. He was on probation for juveniles, and he actually got off probation and got. And I remember the last I heard, he was doing really well and was going to go to community college.
That's
And
so beautiful.
thank you,
Congratulations.
but I credit the mom. Like I credit
Yes.
because he was
So,
going nowhere for my first 10 sessions. I couldn't get anywhere with this kid.
no. So,
But
when I work with parents, I will often say to them, I want you to see me delight in you.
mm,
I want you to see me delight in you so you can learn how to delight in your child. And they would get that. They would get that, because who's delighted in their life?
mm,
Who's shared that joy of their actual just being there and just being present? So modeling that became easier for them when I did as my therapist did with me. I'm just so delighted you're here. But you have to really mean it. You have to
yes,
see that light in them. You have to see it. It's like it's an older book, The Road Less Traveled. Maybe you've heard of it.
yeah, I
Jim
have,
Scott Peck, who said,
yeah,
if you can't love your client in his definition of love, you can't help them.
mm,
So, you have to see it. You have to to see that light in them. Everybody has it. It's just
sure,
hidden, right? So reflecting that back to them, then they were able to say, okay, I see what that feels like in me. That's why my child is so angry.
mm.
I'm not delighting in him or her. I don't
Oh, that's
see
so
that light.
incredible.
Isn't that beautiful?
It's so incredible, and it's tough.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we won't go. This isn't a parent-child therapy session hour, but I will say it's tough for parents, and I would say
Right.
without doing your own work, and also just because you live together, there's sometimes you start taking things for granted that actually are
Correct.
the most sacred, important things to you in your life, which
Mm-hmm.
are your own children and your relationships.
Right.
And we can sort of lose sight of that, which requires work. All of this requires some help, and that's why therapists exist and ministerial counselors and people to kind of
Mm-hmm.
help us with that. And of course, books and
Books.
journaling and things like that can
Yes.
all help.
Yes.
Um, so I'm glad we were able to touch on that. I wanted to ask you. So after the beginning of the book, when you get reunited, and it's just
Mm-hmm.
basically out of nowhere that you get
Mm-hmm.
found by your
Yes.
sister, which was just a
Yes.
beautiful chapter because
Mm.
you had a feeling, and I want to get to that feeling, the premonition. I want to ask you about that, but you had a premonition, then it actually came true, which was incredible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to, before we get to that, I really wanted to ask you about. Then you went and you visited or called your sisters who were open to it and kind of told their story.
Yes.
Um, could you talk about maybe just how that was for you, or maybe an interesting
Mm. Yes.
experience? I mean, it was all interesting, but
Mm. So after we were reunited for, I don't know, 7, 8 years, um, my sister Laverne, who I called Bernie, evidently when I was little I couldn't pronounce her name, and Bernie stuck with her whole life.
hmm,
Um, she's the one that I felt the most, recognized the most, and come to learn she took care of me the most when I was a
hmm,
baby. You can imagine with all those girls, everybody's taking care. You take care of that one, I'll take care of this one kind of
mm-hmm,
thing. So anyway, we were all together, and she said, Barbie, they call me Barbie Sue. Barbie, somebody needs to write a book. Would you write a book for us? And I said, well, why me? And she said, because I know you can do it.
hmm,
So I love her so much I couldn't say no. And then they're all on board. Yeah, Barbie, you got to get our stories and write our lives down, and it'll help other women who've experienced this, and even young men who've gone through this. Will you do it? I said, sure. I thought to myself at the time, how difficult could it be? Oh my gosh, 15 years later, I had gathered all their stories. And this was because, and I should have known this going into it because this is what I was dealing with, stories are slow to be uncovered. Stories are slow to share. It's a testament to how much they trusted me, that they told me their stories. I feel so humbled and honored that they did. But it was still like, I'd go visit one sister and I'd get their story, and then they'd call me a week later, well, Barbie, I didn't tell you everything. Can you come back? So it was like a back forth. Did a lot of traveling in those 15 years. I had one sister, my youngest sister, and maybe I'll speak about gathering her story, because without giving too much away, she was the youngest to be born of the 13. The two that are missing are in between 11. The number 11 and 12 are still missing. So number 13 is really the 11th daughter that we refer to. But she wasn't going to tell me her story at all until all the other sisters told theirs. And it was because I came to realize at the end of the book, she's the last story I gathered. So I'm not going to tell you too much about her story, but my experience of it was she was the youngest. She was born to our mother, stayed with our mother till she was 4 or 5 when she was taken away. And then Bernie, the sister I was talking to you about, adopted her. But she knew a lot about our mother because she had lived with her. And she didn't want to hurt me. So she was going to let all the other sisters do that first. Not really, but tell their stories first. Let me discover what kind of a mother I really had before she would be the one to say, this was the kind of mother I had, and you did too. So she was the last story to gather. There was with many of the sisters' stories, to generalize it a little bit, there was a spiritual element involved in every story they told, where I felt as a minister the presence of spirit, divinity, and their whole persona would change. Their face would light up. They would glow. They would become warm in the middle of a winter in Detroit. So there was a lot of spiritual healing taking form in gathering all their stories. It's hard for me in some ways to hear what they all experienced. It, number one, made me remember my own experiences, and yet broke my heart that I wasn't there. I'm just born a caretaker, I'm assuming, and lived a life to fill that role. I wanted to take care of them. But it was a very healing experience for each one and for me.
Yeah, that is very powerful that you were able to. I mean, I think you have so many experiences. I think you said you're naturally born this way, kind of as a caretaker,
I think so.
but a listener, being able to really listen requires space more than it requires questions. And
Right.
for instance, on a podcast interview, you keep filling the space because we're trying to make sure people keep listening. But if you're interviewing somebody about their life story, I imagine sometimes you just sit there and you don't talk about the story, right? You just kind of wait for it. You can't. It's like a kid when you ask them how's school, they give you sort of a
Okay.
memorized answer, versus if you just hang out with the kid and you kind of,
Right.
play games or whatever, they'll start telling you all sorts of things, right, that you didn't ask.
Correct.
But it takes a gifted person to really sit with an adult, I think, and wait for, especially, all of the sisters faced some level of abandonment and abuse in some way, or something really bad, traumatic happening to them. So I can't imagine that that is not easy to talk about. but I think it's amazing that they all wanted you to write the story and were
Yes,
open to it. It's like they knew they needed to, because you had told me
yes.
that like a lot of them hadn't even told each other.
Not until the book was published.
Right.
And I'm assuming the ones that have passed on didn't know the other sister stories
Oh my goodness.
either. And I wanted to get this book out there, which is one of the big decisions I made to self-publish so I could move it along, because my eldest sister's 89, and I felt like she deserved to know the truth. And she knows now, and she feels released from the sense of responsibility she had as being the eldest sister to take care of them all, and the guilt she carried her whole life that, I didn't take care of my sisters.
Oh
I
my
didn't take
goodness.
care of my sisters. And the release of public broken water and her reading it, she felt like she was released from that because it wasn't her place. There was nothing she could have done with all of us little girls. She asked to keep some of us, and the system back then said, your house is too small, so you can't have your sisters. I mean, so it again, timing all of its own, but in perfect timing. Everything has
Yes.
just been in perfect timing.
Yes. I mean, there's a lot, like you have a spirit of gratefulness, and I can see that,
Mm.
and I'm so glad that you were able to reunite with all of them, except it sounds like two are still missing,
Mhm.
unfortunately.
Well,
Um,
if I could adjust that for a minute,
yeah.
um, there are two that were adopted as infants. So I've been asked,
Mm,
yes, because my mother moved from boyfriend to boyfriend, and she had two more with another boyfriend before the 13th was born.
mm.
They were taken from her and put up for adoption.
Oh,
She's
immediately.
lost, yeah. So she
Oh,
just kept losing babies. So they might not even know they're adopted.
oh,
They
that's a
might
good
not
point.
know anything about this. And then I did DNA testing. They never showed up. My thinking is if they knew about it and they wanted to find us, they would. It'd
Right.
be easy to find us. Broken Water is getting a lot of media coverage. They would have maybe recognized it. So who would we be to seek them out? I could hire a detective. I guess I could do more testing and say, your whole life was a lie to you. Now that you're 60 years old, you need to know the truth. I don't think would be
Ah,
fair.
that makes sense. Yeah, because you're right. Some people, well, a lot of people have been adopted and
They don't
actually are
know.
not told until
That's right.
their adoptive parent is dying. I heard about a story recently where this
Yeah.
occurred, and
Hmm.
they had no idea their whole life that they were adopted. And I mean,
Right.
the shock, it's almost like it's maybe better not to know, right? I mean, the
It
shock
could
of
be.
that, I don't know.
I we
Depends
all
on the
agree.
person.
We all agree that since we don't know, our best bet is to, as you were saying earlier, listen.
Mm,
There's stories out there, and we'll listen for something that might occur. And if it doesn't, then as much as we want them in our lives, it's kind of maybe not about what we want.
yeah, very wise. Yes.
Mm.
Um, well, if people couldn't tell already, you're very connected to your spiritual life.
Mhm.
And I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of talk about, um, we were talking about the understanding the power of premonitions and why you should listen to them,
Mhm.
and also your faith, having faith in the impact of healing that you've gone
Mhm.
through. Anything you want to address with that?
Mm. Premonitions are nothing more than your soul speaking to you. Your soul, there's lots of theories out there that, you lose your soul. I don't agree with that. I think you forget you have it.
Mm,
You lose a sense of connection with it, but it's always there. And your intuition is your surest connection to your soul's purpose, your soul's gifts. And the soul, as a minister, I believe totally, your soul is your spark of divinity. That
mm,
is your piece of God within you, God, whatever word you want to use for your understanding of that phenomenon. So it talks to you if you quiet yourself and listen. It's kind of like the old Quaker school that believed if you just were quiet and be still and know I am God kind of thing, that you would get your answers. So if you can do that, and it's encouraged by someone who loves you through that faith, that you have that connection, you can solve your own problems, you can find your own solution, and I will be here to support you. You will get lots of premonitions, like, oh, maybe don't take the highway today, take the side road. You pay attention to later find out, oh, gee, there was a big backup on the highway and I missed the whole thing because I listened to my intuition. Intuition, like when the sisters found me, I knew they were going to find me 3 days before they found me, because it was like somebody hit me over the head with a frying pan and said, you wanted to find your sisters, why didn't you just ask? Well, I never asked. I was busy trying to do this all myself. Yeah, well, of course, by the age of 43, I still had not accomplished it. So whoever that is for you, or whatever that is for you that you can connect with, that you can ask, believing in that only occurs by way of direct experience of it. No one can tell you, in my opinion. I'm a minister, but I cannot tell you how to achieve that. That's something you find for yourself. I can only assure you that you have it, and that you will find it. That's all I can do, which is a big thing, and allow it to happen. I could show you how I've done it, or things I've tried, or steps I've taken, but hopefully they only put a flashlight on where you, meaning your listeners, readers of the book, where you can find your own connection to that. And it's strong. And, it's in everything, in my belief. You can look at a tree, spend some time underneath it with the breeze, and you'll get a knowingness in you, premonitions about things. It's very, very powerful.
Yes. And I do think, we talk premonitions are even more strong, but like you also compared it to intuition. And in psychology, we always are talking about if you take some time by yourself and you're listening to whatever intuitions, or you're calling, I'm not as familiar with premonitions, but the intuition where it's like a message that kind of comes up from within you, or seems to come out of space, right, or something.
Yeah.
And people say, I've heard many people say, and I've said this myself, I heard that, and then I didn't listen to it. my ego, or my plan was to do this or that, right?
Yeah.
And then I did that, and it turned out horribly. And the premonition or the intuition had said to me, "Don't do that," right? And so, it's interesting.
The soul is egoless. So listening to it means putting your ego down to hear a truth of grace, or a truth of premonition, as you say. Premonition sometimes to people means, it's only going to tell you, don't do this because it can harm you, or it's a negative thing. But I believe premonitions are also into the future, like, this is going to happen to you if you do, if you believe, if you think this way. But that's the messages, and the ifs are all personal to the individual.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And like, I like how you, being a minister, are very open to what people's interpretation of God or spirit or what those are. And I feel like that is an invitation for people to embark on a spiritual life versus a command, which I think is appealing in today's environment.
It certainly is. It certainly is. That's why earlier I said, looking back, I'm so glad I took the course I did. It fits me. It fits the clients who came my way. It's just worked because there's no expectation that you believe this, that, or anything. It's just that I believe in you, kind of thing.
Yes, and well, I want to leave this as a secret for the book, but you had a premonition in the. I want people to read this. I don't want to spoil it, but you literally have this premonition, which you write about in the book in several pages, and I was quite amazed at the outcome, because you basically had documented this. Like you
Yes.
had, like you
Yes.
have people witnessing, going, "Yeah, I have this feeling this is going to happen."
Yes.
And then the moment that you got the news, you said it before the person told you the news,
Right.
which in my mind is like, okay, like that had to have come from somewhere, that because what in the world, of all the times in your life after you've been searching, and would news like well, you'll see what the news is. Obviously it's probably about her sisters, but you can understand that news,
Yeah.
like, you'll understand when you read the book. For the listener, I gotta keep something secret here, that
Mhm.
this is not a normal experience you had of an everyday kind of thing. This was definitely like a spiritual experience that occurred.
I think people refer to them as miracles,
Yeah.
whatever that definition is for them. I think miracles should be a normal phenomenon in
Mm.
my life experience. It should be normal. We should expect them. And I think that would open the door to their occurrence. I mean, we're getting way out there now, but that's my
Yeah.
belief.
Well, no, this is about your story too. I mean, yes,
Yeah.
we're covering, we talked about foster care and trauma, and
Hmm.
the amazing power of story, and
Mm.
meaning that's so important in the bonding between, siblings, and
Yes.
the hope that we can have siblings bonding with an adult that cares, or a parent if possible, is so pivotal to mental and physical health. But the spiritual side can't be ignored, and I like how you have framed it, a very open invitation. And I believe you said your first counselor was, you were Catholic at the time. I
Yes.
don't know if you're still Catholic, or if that's like a
No.
brand. You're not Catholic. Yeah,
You
it's like,
can't be an ordained minister in the Catholic Church as a woman. So
okay, yes,
yeah,
understood, yes.
yeah, yeah.
So you're not no longer Catholic, but your first counselor was, you said, did she say Hindu? Is that what you said?
Yeah, her father was Jewish, her mother was Catholic, and so they decided to raise their children in a very different, religion. Now we're talking, 60s, I guess, and raised her
Wow.
Hindu,
Wow.
which is all about the soul, right? Which was
Yes.
in all my years of Catholicism, I don't think I ever really heard the word soul. you know, so it was something I am not Hindu. I am what I would call more interfaith. I
Yes.
believe in, the unity of, if we really look at all the sacred scriptures, there's a unity in it that cannot be denied. It says the same thing if we look deep enough. So that's kind of a beautiful thing.
Yes, I agree. I'm a much bigger fan of interfaith
Hmm.
practices than, well, but people will know that from listening to the podcast previous episodes. But yes, I think that I can see that the way that you are. I'm saying this very, I don't know you that well, but just from my impressions from the book, is that your spirituality and the way you try to practice it involves actions in your life, and feelings, rather than maybe sort of certain beliefs that are sort of a
Right,
block of beliefs that you kind of carry
right.
around. Because in your book, and there's just the way I talked to you about, and the way you work with clients, which we were talking a little bit about before the recording, is you're trying to somewhat embody the
Hmm.
spirituality, and the way that
Hmm.
you act, which is honestly probably the most challenging thing to do,
Mm.
because it's easier to say something really eloquent than behave attempt to behave in a way that elucidates that sort of love and compassion and feeling
Right.
through yourself. I think that's a huge challenge for all of us. So
I
I
think you're
appreciate that.
defining the difference between knowledge and wisdom.
Okay.
I think you're
Oh,
defining
yes.
that.
So
Yeah.
knowledge is
So
just
to
information, and how would you define it?
knowledge is, my education, books I read that are more academic, research, it's all valuable. It's all important. But if you stop with just the knowledge, you lack the essence of healing, not you, but individuals,
Anyone, right?
which is wisdom, which is utilizing it in a way that benefits the heart and soul of the matter. You take the knowledge and you make it wise. It's like the first psychiatrist I saw who was using knowledge only with his glasses down on his nose, looking down on me, saying, "This is what you have to do." I'm sure that's what his research had shown or what a book had shown. It didn't have any wisdom in it at all. So he had knowledge. He was a psychiatrist. I mean, he had a lot of knowledge, but he had no wisdom.
Hmm.
So that's the difference as I see it. Use your
Yes.
knowledge. You got to have it. You got to have the research. You got to have
Yeah.
the training. But, make it wise.
And living the wisdom is sort of like applying the knowledge in a way that makes sense to the situation. And
Right.
and that involves basically an aligned perception with the situation or the person you're trying to help with,
Right.
and not just
And
your
it's,
own little
right.
theory.
It's not about us. It's not
Mhm.
about us. It's about the other. It's egoless. Who
Egoless.
can be that? That's just my own way of referring to it. But who can be that 100% of the time, or even reach 100% of egolessness, if that's the word.
It is
But
a word, yeah.
that's the goal. Actually, is to keep the ego somewhere else.
Tamed, yeah. Tamed
Yeah.
or in check, right? At least in our
Right.
knowledge, so it doesn't take over. Yeah, that's
Right.
the ego gets us in a lot of trouble.
Yes.
Pretty often. So I wanted to kind of ask you, we're kind of getting towards the end here of the interview,
Mhm,
but
mhm.
there's so much in the book that it can't really be summarized. But I guess I would just maybe ask you to speak to the folks out there who have been through some sort of abandonment or abuse. What is maybe some wise words or advice you could give
Mhm,
them,
mhm.
um, if they're maybe just, I'm going to the ones who haven't received healing yet, the ones who are
Right.
out there who haven't really felt like they have healed somewhat from this. Can you kind of
Well,
talk to them?
sure. In my opinion, the hardest step to healing any kind of childhood like this is acceptance. Now,
Mm.
in most therapeutic processes, you'll find acceptance comes at the end.
Mm.
Now, I just released a little workbook, 9 steps to heal, what your inner child knows, which is your soul,
Mm.
9 steps to rescue your abused child. I'm not pitching it, I'm just saying it begins with the first step, acceptance. You can accept that your childhood was horrible without having to go into the details, without having to relive the trauma. Just accept it. Tell yourself, I accept the reality of my childhood, period. Do that first instead of at the end, because you're already ahead of the game if you've accepted it. Maybe some individuals won't even know what it is they're accepting. They don't even know what happened, but at some level, they know something happened. So accept that. And then let's build some kind of I'm also a very logical person. Let's build some kind of framework now for you to use to heal without having to look at all the detail. Uh, if you have to look at it, fine, but make sure you have a therapist you really trust that you can feel very comfortable with, and keep searching until you find that therapist that you can trust. But it's a process. But if you accept it first, it's going to make it easier to talk about it because you already accepted it.
That is true. Yeah, the denial factor is very
Right.
difficult because, especially with post traumatic stress, people are afraid
Right.
to acknowledge, or it's like a fear built into
Right.
to avoid. It's like a natural mechanism to
Of
protect
course.
yourself, and so to
Of course.
actually get yourself to accept it, and
Then work on it.
then you can heal, then you can change. And
Right.
that actually
Yeah.
reminded me of a quote
Mm.
by good old Carl Rogers from the
Yes. Good
60s.
old Carl Rogers.
The
Yes.
the curious
Then 60s.
paradox. What's that?
The 60s.
Yes, the 60s. I was not here. The
I was.
curious, yeah, you were. The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. And that's actually
Right.
what you're saying, is that
Right.
it's hard to change anything about yourself. And there's a lot more to that. That
Hmm.
he wrote a whole book about this, right? But
Hmm. Right. Right.
but if you accept the reality of the situation, it's hard to do that alone.
Mm-hmm.
I find that most of us humans, when we're doing something or another, whether we're avoiding our own trauma or whether we're just possibly in a bad habit, we certainly don't like to accept the full reality of it. I think
Right, right.
that we like to make up a story in our mind that makes it less harsh, especially with bad
Right.
habits. Oh, it's not that bad. It's just this or that. Right. And with
Yeah.
trauma, we just sort of, it depends on the person. But when I had trauma, I like to pretty much pretend it didn't exist,
Well, I did the same for years.
yeah.
Absolutely.
And so
But
it's a freedom that comes back to
mhm,
the beginning, I guess, of the podcast, the freedom of telling the truth, which is very difficult, like you discussed.
right,
And you're right. It has to be at the right time in the right place,
right,
and there's got to be safety and vulnerability to either write it in your own journal or to be able to tell someone you trust.
right,
And oftentimes people choose therapists because we are ethically obligated not to use this information against you in any way,
right.
and or to harm you.
Mm.
So the acceptance piece to me is huge, and I feel that you, through writing this book, it's very obvious that your sisters were able to accept, a lot of them were able to accept what had happened to them
Correct.
and to the whole system, your whole family system, and the harsh difficulties of that, and how it affected each of you differently, but yet you have this sort of common bond or common, I don't want to say common, shared experience is the word I'm looking for, in a way I can't imagine, but I almost wonder if you can't really compare people, but that it could almost bond you closer than maybe some
Yes.
folks who have just had like a regular childhood and we're like, okay, well, I live in Cleveland, you live in
It-
Pittsburgh, see you next year, right? There's a
right.
bit of
Absolutely.
a want to be together in this closeness.
Absolutely. Yes.
I could say I could see that
Yes.
in the book.
It absolutely is true. That is absolutely how we are. That's the truth. And you know, together once we were reunited, we were so blessed to be reunited when we were, because we had many years together of health and joy and playing and friendship and just camaraderie, where we'd celebrate Christmas in June so we could all come, give gifts, decorate trees, do the whole 9 yards. But we were also together when we started losing sisters, which I think
Mm.
was invaluable to our um, processing the additional grief that that all brought for us. So there's a lot to be said about bonding, whether it's a sibling or a dear friend, having those bonds in your life propel healing, I believe.
I'm just so glad that I've gotten to speak with you and interview you, and the wisdom is just flowing right out of you. And I could just sense your experience and your passion for helping people, and writing down the story. I think is a totally different way of helping people, because as
Right.
you're a practitioner and a minister, you can help people that are coming to you intentionally. But with the book, I actually think that you're going to reach a lot of people that you don't even know, and that you are
Yes.
unintentionally helping them heal because,
Intentionally,
well, intentionally, sorry.
unintentionally.
That's what I mean. I sort of,
I'm just on the title of your podcast. I love it. It's intentional, but you're right. Unintentionally, it's. I'm
well, you don't
already.
even know them.
I
Yeah, I don't know
don't
what
know
you
them.
call that.
I'm getting emails from people that are telling me I healed a part of myself I never could.
Oh,
I got the bravery from reading your book to tell my story. I got the bravery to leave my uncle out of my life. Just these different things. So um, we all wished, every one of us wished that by the telling of our stories, which was painful and paid a price. Some of the sisters paid a price for telling their stories. They living in small towns and what have you. But the goal and the desire to help others heal was so strong amongst all of us, and I'm thrilled beyond words that we figured if we could help one person, we'd be thrilled. Turns out we're going to be helping a lot. So we're just delighted.
That is lovely. I knew the book had just come out, I believe, in 2023. It was
May, yeah.
in May. Yeah. So not even a year it's been out, and you're already getting feedback. This is wonderful to know. And
Yeah.
for a lot of folks that listen to this podcast, usually buy books used or new because it's a small price of admission to enrich your mind. And you can get this book on Amazon and wherever books are sold, it sounds like, and barbaralane.info. So www.barbaralane.info. And of course, you're also on Facebook and Instagram as Barbara Lane Author, which people can kind of type that into the search engine. I'm sure that you'll come up. And I think that would be great for people to just be able to connect with you in that way, and maybe share the. I think that the thing that also struck me about your book was I was like, this is the perfect book club book.
It is. I'm speaking at a book club next Thursday.
Are you?
That's been happening. Yes. Yeah. And the other thing is, I think it's perfect for social worker students. In that profession or human development,
Yes.
because they can analyze how it impacted every one of us. And I think it would be enlightening to that. So I'm seeking ways, if any listener knows how I can do this, is to invite the presence of my book, or I'm willing to come speak to classes if it's close enough to me. I'm here in Virginia in the Shenandoah Valley for, just the benefit of helping students. I'd be delighted to speak.
Well,
Whatever.
that is wonderful. And I will have all of your connections on the internet in the show notes of this episode, which will show up. So people can click right there and send you an email or get in touch with you on social media. I think that'd be awesome.
Very good. I answer every email. It may take me a little while, but I answer them all.
That is wonderful. Well, thank you, Barbara. Anything else you want to leave the listener with before we head off?
I just want to thank you for what you're doing. It's just powerful. And I know it takes time to put a podcast show together. I was going to do one there for a while on a story I was writing, and it just overwhelmed the amount of time and energy it took, and my level of knowledge on how to have all the right gear and what have you. So I know the energy and effort you're putting into this, and it can only be because you're called to really make a difference. I really appreciate that in you. So thank you for having me. I'm honored.
Well, thank you, Barbara. And I am honored as well, and appreciate that.
You have a good one. And again, thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. And there you have it. This has been another episode of the Intentional Clinician podcast. If you're enjoying this show, please share it with people you know. I would surely appreciate it. Or take just a minute to give us a rating on iTunes. As most of you know, I am passionate about preventing future violence in the United States. My colleagues and I have started a nonprofit called the National Violence Prevention Hotline, a 501c3 organization. We are endeavoring to gain funding and collaborators so that we can start a 24/7 hotline and chat line to reach potential perpetrators before they act violently. It is a bold effort to save lives and curb violence by working to connect with potential offenders while they are in the planning stages of violence, help to de-escalate them, and provide resources so that they can get appropriate professional help. The National Violence Prevention Hotline is looking to open up a conversation about violence in society, the causes, and the solutions. You can learn more by visiting our website. www.violencepreventionhotline.org. Join us online by signing our petition on the website, sharing the website with your network of people, donating to the cause if you like, and you can now even write your congressperson from our website with a simple form. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you are a therapist looking for ethical and excellent medical billing services, check out therapistbillingservicesllc.com. That's www.therapistbillingservicesllc.com. Billing services created by therapists for therapists. If you're looking for an EMDR International Association consultant, I am a consultant and I can provide you the 20 hours you need to become EMDRIA certified. I have groups online and in person, and I do individual consultation. Just send me a message at the website and I'll get back to you. If you want to get trained in EMDR therapy, check out the great training opportunities with EMDR Training Solutions. I've worked with them before and they are phenomenal, so register today. If you are in need of counseling, do not hesitate to make an appointment at a local counseling center in your area. You can also make an appointment with the excellent clinicians in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area at Health for Life Counseling and the Trauma Informed Counseling Center of Grand Rapids by visiting www.healthforlifegr.com. The recording you just listened to consists of the personal opinions of Paul Krauss and his guest, and while these are based on the literature they have read and the experience in their fields, this should not be viewed as a definitive opinion on any subject. Listening to this podcast is not a substitute for treatment. If you're in a crisis, please dial 911 or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 988. You can also text 741-741 and a live trained crisis counselor will respond. Did you know you could support your local bookstore by shopping at www.bookshop.org? You can order from the comfort of your own home online while supporting local brick and mortar businesses near you. If you are a therapist and you are not a member of your national or local therapy organizations such as the American Counseling Association or the American Mental Health Counselors Association, please get involved, at least pay the dues. It will help the lobbyists in our field keep us from becoming gig workers. And of course, there's the bonus of increasing mental health education around the United States and helping people understand what counseling is and promoting best practices within our profession. Until next time, I wish you all a safe and peaceful week.